Hey!
How you doing?
How are you, senor? Good to see you, brother. Thanks for doing this.
My pleasure.
I've been so excited.
Yeah, you can slate those two.
This is Michael Mann, and I ride with El Rey. That's sort of our slogan. I ride with El Rey.
Oh, I'm supposed to say it.
Yeah, you say it.
Yeah, this is Michael Mann, and I ride with El Rey.
Here we go. Percent. And action.
Michael Mann, real pleasure to have you here on the director's chair.
It's great to be here.
We're here in Santa Monica at the mix stages of your offices here, where you do some editing and mixing. You know, I got the idea for this show, actually, from a conversation we had one dinner. I don't know if you remember.
Oh, yeah, Toscana.
At our favorite Italian restaurant. I was sitting there by myself, and just enjoying my pizza, and you were there with your lovely family enjoying dinner, and you invited me over. You said, hey, what are you doing by yourself? Come over here. And we had one of the most invigorating conversations I'd ever had on filmmaking ever. And talking about your early years and your first films. And I was just so excited afterwards, and I saw you get so excited. I thought, wow, that's really why I wanted to do this show, because it's an interview show of a director asking another director questions about the craft, because we all approach it differently, and we all have different solutions for the same challenges, and those differences are what define us. Your films are considered to be landmark examples of highly visual yet character-driven stories, primal, extremely authentic, and influential. And here's why. Thief. Manhunter. Last of the Mohicans. Heat. The Insider. Ali. Collateral. Miami Vice. Public Enemies. So our early days are kind of what set us on our course, and really where our differences come from. Tell me about your early days. How did you start off?
I got into film. I got into film two ways. I got into film when I was taking a film history course at the University of Wisconsin. It was freezing, it was 10 below zero, 10:30 at night, and you're coming down the hill where all the buildings were from a screening, and I was really so kind of swept away from what I had seen, and when this experience that we all have, was kind of a wide awake dreaming, and you're so transported, and you're into the film, and you have one part of your brain is hoping it doesn't end too soon. That feeling that we've all had. And it just occurred to me the first time. Wait a minute, that you've got to do this. I remember exactly where I was on this sidewalk halfway down Bascom Hill, and looking up, and starry night, dry cold, and said, you got to do this. What you're going to do? You're going to make films. One of the only times in my life was absolute total self-knowledge, like an epiphany, just complete awareness. That's what you're going to do. There's no question about it. There's no executive decision making. It was just, that's it.
And what, were you working visually before that at all?
No, not really.
Wow.
Not really. It changed my life. I mean, right after that moment, everything else I did as an undergraduate, suddenly my grades were like 4.0. I just knew exactly what I wanted to do. Just switch it around. So I wanted to go to film school, and there was obviously no internet, so you went to the library and you got catalogs in different universities and you tried to figure out what's the experience going to be like from thumbing through pages. And of course, everything I thought about every film school I looked at was wrong. I think I rejected UCLA because I thought it was kind of a vocational school. Meanwhile, Francis Coppola came out of UCLA. Jim Morrison came out of UCLA film program. But the London Film School was exactly what I wanted. It was everything about both the technology and the art of film. It was hooked up with the BFI, so the British Film Institute, which had a great library. So that's where the history and some of the theory came from. But I had a youthful arrogance that I thought I knew what I wanted to make films about. I just wanted to know how to do it, because I didn't know what happened when light hit a chemical emulsion on acid. I had no idea, or how sound got on film.
Right. So what was it about? What was the experience like being in London? How was that?
It was great, because the first time I was doing only exactly what I wanted to do, and I was broke, so was everybody else. London's the worst place in the world to be broke and cold and wet. I was living on 10 pounds a week. It was £5 for rent, £5 for food. That was it.
And then what got you back to the States making, and what was your first work there? How did you get into something like Starsky and Hutch?
I started writing as a way to try to get into directing, and then a great guy named Bob Lewin, who I was friendly with, was a head writer on a show that was starting up called Starsky and Hutch. First of all, it's unorthodox to see detectives in jeans and gym shoes. That was the first thing. That was really that was considered radical in '74.
There's nothing to worry about unless you're doing something illegal.
I wound up writing, one episode, and that aired and was very successful. And he asked me to do a whole bunch more. I did about 3 or 4, and then I moved to a show called Police Story. Police Story was fascinating because it was the true detective of its time. Every single episode was different, and each one was based on a real event.
Right.
And you went and spent time with that cop or that detective and dug into how he felt. And it's all happening in the context of kind of rolling through the streets and spending long nights in various places and meeting a lot of folks.
Yeah, I remember growing up, my brother and I used to watch Starsky and Hutch. We thought it was just the coolest show. And then one day, Jericho Mile came on. Jericho Mile hit us so hard. That was like nothing we'd ever seen as far as a TV movie.
There was a movie, the week script, that I rewrote for Folsom and shot it in Folsom. Folsom was the exact opposite of what I expected. I thought I would see gray men under the dictatorial thumb of authoritative prison guard population. It was exactly the opposite. There was a brio and an energy among the convicts. The guards were completely out of shape and stayed as far away from the convicts as they could. I wanted to bring some of that into Jericho Mile.
You won an Emmy for writing.
Went in for writing. I won a DGA award for the year for the movie of the week.
What did that do for your career? 'Cause I remember that, seeing it the night it aired.
By that point, I had not directed anything dramatic, and I was kind of come up with a strategy about how to get my first feature made. Mm-hmm. I had become kind of a hot writer in TV momentarily, and I decided that I was just going to have to extort my way into directing. Basically said, I'm not going to write anything else for you, ABC, unless I can direct it. And that was it. I had this great plan in the sky that I'm going to do one movie of the week that was going to do very, very well, and that was going to get me the ability to make Thief, and it did.
Tell me about Thief.
They're all laid out scores. $4 million at wholesale and unmounted stones.
I already had the screenplay for Thief when I did Jericho Mile. John Santucci was the thief that I based most of it on. I wasn't interested in looking at movies about thieves or deriving it from books about thieves. I wanted to go and hang with thieves and derive it from thieves, So there was a sense of how rich, authentic milieu is. I just became alive to that, and it held a magic for me and a challenge to try and convey that.
I want to talk just a little bit about the Michael Mann immersion process. What point did you start having James Caan learn how to actually crack a safe? Where did you get this, having an actor go into such immersion and knowing the character so they could just be the character?
If you can actually do a thing, there's a certain confidence that shows up. You possess that ability. So to be able to bring an actor like Jimmy to the point where he can really open a safe, he really knows his way around weapons. He knows what it really means to be somebody who's spent from when they're 18 to when they're 32 in prison. You don't know what music's play. You don't know how to work the new model coin phone. You don't know anything.
Right.
All those years are gone. Does he even conceive of a future? What does he want for future? Frank had a very articulated future because he felt the need to invent one, but he didn't have any life experience because he was in the prison, so he had to get clippings from magazines.
Thief is so authentic and meticulously researched and detailed, and then this stylistic approach comes in, the music of Tangerine Dream. Originally, you wanted Chicago blues.
It was funny. It was one of those decisions I was very ambivalent about it and intimidated by it because it was. If it was blues, it had a certain kind of regional kind of naturalism to it, which meant it would be one movie. And on the other hand, if it had Tangerine Dream, because it's abstract, I thought that the themes would emerge. It wouldn't be so locked to the naturalistic grittiness of Chicago.
Something I like about the choice that you made, the juxtaposition of this almost extreme authenticity with this very subjective where you're in their head. The Tangerine Dream music tends to do that, and the sound and the design.
I try to bring audience into these characters in a very intimate way and subjectify the character as much as possible. What happens to this guy, what he's thinking, and what that means. I want you to feel the rage within Frank that he's containing.
My money is still in your pocket, which is from the yield of my labor. Why don't you join the labor union? I am wearing it.
That exploitation could be going on in anywhere from a factory floor, a steel mill, or an advertising agency. I want what's happening to generalize and maybe work on you a little bit. I had developed an interest in serial killers. It wasn't so much that Miami Vice was so advanced, it was that everything else was so
Here we go. Percent. Here we go. Percent. And action.
Tell me about Manhunter.
Psychologists call him a psychopath. They don't know what else to call him.
In a garden of Peter, honey, don't you know that I'm loving you?
I used to watch Manhunter in the theater several times a week for several weeks because when I was in college, I was broke. I waited till it got to the second run and I would see it for $1. And no greater dollar spent than sitting and watching Manhunter on a big
that's
screen.
impressive.
I couldn't wait to see the scene where he walks into the house for the first time. Turns on the light and then there's just blood on all the walls. And he breaks it down with this very calm, very detached monologue into the microphone.
Intruder entered through kitchen sliding door. Used a glass cutter anchored to a suction cup. His entry was skillful.
When you talk to a good homicide detective, he knows as a homicide detective that his first impressions are going to be really valuable.
Right.
And they're really important. And he's going to pick up stuff that he's not even conscious he's picking up.
Right.
And so when he walks in, he wants to walk in, stop, the whole room should be quiet, and he'll start on the left and he'll just sweep the entire room and pull it all in, and then he'll start talking about blood splatter here and the body was laying over there and everything else. And, you know, so he's sensitive to his own intake. This to me is very much like what we do as directors and what actors do. And so I was taken by that.
It's a fantastic sequence. I mean, I would go to watch it again and again.
Even with his throat cut, Leeds tried to fight because the intruder was moving to the children's room. What'd the killer do with them after they were dead?
I had developed an interest in serial killers, got familiar with a guy who never got out of prison, a guy named Dennis Wynn Wallace. He killed, I think, 3 or 4 people. The way the world worked in his imagination was complete. It was unified, and I was fascinated with the delusional scheme, the psychopathology. In those years, in '85, material this edgy was shocking. It was truly shocking. I wrote a screenplay on this initially. It failed. It didn't really work. And then Richard Roth had Red Dragon.
Red Dragon.
And came to me with that, and I thought this is exactly how to do it, to have a detective who has the skill to project himself into the mindset of Dr. Lecter, and my film played by Brian Cox.
You want to know how he's choosing them, don't you?
I thought you might have some ideas.
This was the first time anybody really had heard about profiling. Nobody knew any of this stuff ahead of time. So to understand the killer wanted, you have to understand his fantasy first. The reason for this is all detectives start with what's the motive.
Right.
Then they know where to go to start detecting. In these kinds of crimes, the motive is the fantasy. You have to understand the delusion. The danger to this guy is the deeper he goes into it, the more danger there is to himself. These are very sick experiences that will disable him. But if he doesn't push himself deeper into it, he won't understand what he needs to understand to capture a dollar high.
Well, here I am.
I always want to know what somebody wants. What's the high? What's the heightened experience? The heightened experience for Dollarhide was creating a fantasy scenario in which he was receiving true love. He, as people would sometimes create trophies, which could be body parts, they could be images. He would have images of himself being accepted by a woman. In order to stage this, he killed the people, killed the families, and put mirrors in the eyes. He's a man with a catastrophically low self-esteem. I mean, you know, subterranean, because he had a hair lip that had been repaired. Mm-hmm. He thought it made him a monster. It didn't. It was in his imagination. So his unexpected romance with a blind girl played by Joan Allen was such a beautiful kind of a passage for me, you know, to try and make that happen. She couldn't see him. Yeah. And because she couldn't see him, he didn't feel not vulnerable to that, right. You know. And so he felt he was free to court her in his awkward way. And he was very, very bright and focused. And he realizes right away that because she can't see, her other senses must be compensating for her. They must be very strong. So he takes her to a veterinarian he knows at the zoo who sedated a tiger so that she can actually feel a tiger. He understands that her sensory intake is going to be tactile. So he takes her there, and then there's a duality that starts to happen because she's moved powerfully by feeling the breath of the tiger on her hand. And we see Dollahide back behind her in a corner, and we get a second dimension, a second level of meaning to this because we understand that Dollahide is putting himself in the place of the tiger. And he's imagining he's the tiger being stroked by this woman. I don't know how we got on this subject.
Oh, no,
but it's one of my favorite
the
passages.
style. I don't know. The subjectivity, the music, the style, the songs you use, the photography.
This I also wanted disturbing. I put together some colors that don't normally occur in nature, like oranges and greens together. They don't frequently occur in nature. And it was to do exactly what we're talking about. I mean, it was to bring you inside these moments. We all get seduced, but it's all supposed to be dramatically functional. It's making you feel a certain way in service of what that scene story and what I want that scene story to do to you.
And it's throughout all your films, and it's not just the music or the production design and the acting, it's everything. And I know that's the job, but you just seem to do it so well that it seems to transcend what our job is.
Oh, thank you very much.
The levels of detail, and like when even walking into this building, it reminded me of the Lecter's show. Is that something the production design brought to you, or did you just see it once and go, you know what? I want something.
Well, yeah, I search for shapes that talk to you.
Yeah.
I want them to speak to you. I want them to. They're a platform for dramatic action that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And there are many kinds of prisons you could have put Lecter into. Yeah. And the idea that he would be contained and compressed in something as austere as the High Museum in Atlanta was the idea, rather than having him in some dungeon or something gothic or some ordinary, It's
amazing. It's amazing to look at and see. And again, it puts you in you don't know what's real.
It kind of makes sense in a delusional way. Dollahide's house, the architecture of the whole place, there's nothing symmetrical. There's nothing at the rational 90 degrees to anything else in that whole house. Everything is at some extreme, acute angle. The shapes of the chairs, the toaster, the lamps, everything. In my mind, Dollahide would have selected these objects, and he would have imputed to them significance, feedback. They would make him feel a certain way. He's got the television set turned so that called the carrier signal is what's broadcasting. And there were murals, there were NASA murals that were on these walls. That one is a perspex wall he kind of walks through and in.
So the conversation we had at that Toscana was about the third act. I thought that whole last shootout, that was a stylistic thing for the jump cuts. No, it's because we didn't have any time or money, and it just blew me away. What was that story? Because
we had no more money. We had no more time. The special effects. No, it was more like you got one more day shooting and that's it. So it became a 33-hour day.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Last day.
I didn't care for the special effects team, and frankly, I thought they were dangerous. And so they were gone. So we had no special effects. So consequently, you couldn't really fire blanks. You couldn't have squibs. And you couldn't have much of anything. So there's a scene where a cop gets shot. He gets shot in the head with a shotgun. Shaved his head, got a little hairpiece, put that on top of it. I sent Guzmano over to the 7-Eleven to buy some pork brains and some ketchup and some other stuff. We put that underneath the hairpiece, stuck it on, got a fishing line, tied it to a pole. He froze like that. We rolled, action, and he pretends to get shot, then he goes like that, and the fishing line pulls the thing off. When Dollahide got shot, it was something just about as primitive and stupid. I had a cigar, and I was operating a camera, and I said, freeze, and he'd freeze like that, and I'd turn off the camera, run over, burn a hole in his shirt, throw some fake blood on it, get back behind the camera, and say action, and then he got shot. We just repeated doing this. So the whole thing was just
and you watch
homemade.
It and you say, this is brilliant stylistic choices. Miami Vice. How did that come about? We're showing Miami Vice on El Rey, by the
Okay.
way. And it's doing great business. People love Miami Vice. I got to work with Don Johnson a few times, and by far that's the quietest I hear the crew is when Don's there, just hanging on his every word, telling stories about Miami Vice. You know,
Yeah.
You guys had no permits, but just drive up, get out of the car, shoot something, shoot the place up, get in, take off.
Oh yeah, no, we were rocking and rolling. I mean, it was a lot of adventures. We'd meet people at a club or something. If we wrapped at 4 a.m, we'd meet some 22-year-old retired cocaine importer, and one episode later, he's a guest star. And I mean, so it was a real kind of it was rolling. You know?
I'm surprised that you didn't direct any of them, considering it's so much you can see clearly borrows from your style.
The job of executive producing, when you're doing so many,
Right.
is basically like executive directing.
Camera mark.
Meaning that across 22 episodes, I want all the wardrobe to look like this, cars and the boats like that. It's the kind of music we're going to use, and then it's going to be cinematic, because why not? And it was a different look, a different attitude, a different way of being, and telling different kinds of stories.
You started cinematic television. People wouldn't go to the movies anymore on Friday because they got the movies at home.
I mean, the other stuff on the air was like Duke of Hazzard.
Yeah.
It was really,
People,
you know, it wasn't
what
so
it was
much
like.
that Miami Vice was so advanced. It was that everything else was so. By just being cinematic and being tuned in, you know, we brought something to it.
But that's a huge thing to do cinematic in that kind of a schedule. I mean, I don't know how you did that.
With great difficulty. Don't forget, we weren't doing 8 hours and calling ourselves a series, or 12 hours or 11 hours and calling ourselves a series. We did 22 hours, 7 days.
Totally cinematic.
Totally cinematic. You're
Movies.
shooting them in 7 days.
7 days shoots?
7-day shoots.
geez.
As slick as Crockett and Tubbs looked, if the camera turned around and shot the crew, it was the polar opposite.
Yeah.
Everybody was, out of shape, dirty, a wreck. But we're having a great time doing this. It was also, to kind of date it culturally, the show was consciously, in my mind, anti-disco. I hated disco. And so this show, culturally, I mean, it wasn't the Beatles, it was the Stones. It wasn't Mods, it was rockers. And that attitude extended into the politics, and the show was very political. Right. We did a show on Contragate, before Contragate. Jackson Browne did all the music on it.
This better be good, Stone. How's footage of U.S. combat troops fighting in Nicaragua grab you?
They're running guns against the Sandinistas into Nicaragua, and to add insult to injury, I had Gordon Liddy play the CIA guy.
You all had so many great
we had
talents.
we had everybody from Leo Coca to Miles Davis.
The whole cast was fantastic. You really discovered a lot of Latin talent.
I'm Lieutenant Castillo, your new boss.
How did you find Eddie Olmos?
I knew Eddie from well before Miami Vice, and I was a big admirer of his work. I first saw him in Zoot Suit.
It had a little bit of that in it, that he would these isometrics to hold himself a certain way as a zoot suiter, and then I love that you had Castillo bring that in. I think it was originally a different, lieutenant who gets killed like some episodes in, and then when Eddie shows up, he was like
I cast somebody else, and I didn't like it. We
so
changed the casting by killing
him off and bringing in Eddie. Eddie was amazing. The whole cast was fantastic. Yeah. There's this primal attraction to some people that you as a director have to figure out and go, this is the guy, because you see how people react. And what happened to me with Danny Trejo, we're shooting Desperado, and the Mexican town we're in, they didn't know who Antonio Banderas was. He was from Europe, and they didn't know who the star was. But they saw the cameras, they saw Antonio, and they saw a small bit player, being played by Danny Trejo. They all thought he was the star. Everyone just would surround him.
Yeah.
Thought, okay, that guy's got something.
His uncle was in MA, and his uncle was in Jericho Mile.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
The spirit on the show was so strong, and the magic of being in 1757 was so real. Nobody wanted to leave.
Here we go. Percent. Here we go. Percent. And action.
Last of the Mohicans.
Yeah.
Just tell me a little bit about that.
Just stay alive no matter what occurs. No matter how long it takes, no matter how far. I will find you.
I had been thinking about Last of the Mohicans since I was 3 years old. When I was 3, during the war, they had a church near Humboldt Park in Chicago. They used to run movies for the neighborhood. And I must have seen Last of the Mohicans there in 16mm black and white print. What stuck in my mind was the sadness of the suicide of the sister. And the juxtaposition of northeastern woodlands Indians with redcoats. Because we used to see Indians in westerns and not Indians with European military. And the juxtaposition was just staggering to me. And that was where it came from. And then the challenge, since I like to do that kind of first-person research and find ways to immerse myself into it to find out how something really was, or how people really were, or what really happened, or how do you feel, how do you do that, with something taking place in 1757? What it looked like, what it must have been like. It became a collision of many, many cultures, rivalries and foreign policies, and 3 different systems of justice operating at the same time. And most poignantly for Last Mohican, because this is what the whole movie's about, how do you view life and existence when you feel that you are on the edge of being annihilated, that there are no more of you?
Well, they are all there, but one. I, Chingachgook, last of the Mohicans.
We're shooting across maybe 200 miles long strip of the Blue Ridge Mountains. We closed down 26 miles of state highways and got the FAA to clear planes out of the air so it wouldn't be contrails. We cleared 40 acres and used that wood to build a fort. The log cabin in the beginning, we just built it. We really planted the crops because why fake it? You just build it. The magic of it was that you could get up at 2, 3 in the morning, which was about the time when the extras were called to do all the makeup, and go to this base camp, which was the biggest base camp I've ever seen. And you were in 1757. You were just there.
Background!
The spirit on the show was so strong, and the magic of being in 1757 was so real. Nobody wanted to leave. And the last day of shooting, everybody just kind of stood around, and beer and wine and everything else came out, but everybody just took their hiking boots off and threw in a big bonfire and just stood there. No one wanted to go.
Did you find the budget doubling or something because of the amount of stuff you had to do?
The movie was, I forget what the budget was, but it was it wasn't very. It was like 33 million or something.
So I talked to Roger Birnbaum. He said the budget was 17 million.
Was what?
17 million. And first, what you told him, Michael, what am I going to do? These guys are killing me. Disney's killing me because the budget keeps going up. And so you invited him out to the set. He took the jet out there. You remember this? So I hope it's true because it sounds so great. He gets to the set, and there you are with a helicopter. He gets in the helicopter, and you take him to the set. And he said that you got on the megaphone, and you call into the megaphone, and all the Indians attack him. And then you took him and he's like, oh my God, this is wonderful. And then you took him to the fort and let him shoot off the cannons. And he went back and told them, Michael knows what he's he's making it authentic. It's real for real. And he got them all off your back because you showed them what they were getting for the money, which was just incredible recreation. Yeah. Like you say, you're there in that time period, and that's the only way to do it. What was it like for the 3-year-old in you to go stage some of those battle scenes? We had never seen anything like that before, especially this is before previs.
It's just fascinating research to start to do. I mean, how did people fight with edged weapons? They used tomahawks. So how do you fight with a tomahawk? Nobody really knew. We had to discover all of this stuff. We based it on 18th century saber fighting manuals. How do you take out a fort? What were the systems of artillery? We had to figure out how to make the mortars work. So they were pneumatic, and they fired basketballs. They were spray painted black, followed by the flame, and we had a flame that we wanted the flame to hang in the air quite a bit, so we used naphtha because it's slow burning, and that's how we built all these cannons and built, and all these mortars. And when I got frustrated in pre-production, I used to go down to the special effects place in Asheville, and we'd have to test fire the mortars. We'd shoot black basketballs off into the neighborhoods.
What was that like directing those two guys? Were the two icons like that? How did you approach?
With great respect.
Here we go. Percent. Here we go. Percent. And action.
Tell me about Heat. Let's talk about Heat, because that's just one of my favorite movies. I went and saw it with Quentin opening day, like 11 a.m. screening. We sat real close to the front because I knew it was going to be a big widescreen experience. And we watched the whole thing, and he turned to me at the end. He goes, "I love LA crime films." And that's like has to be the ultimate LA crime film. I heard that when you had the original script, you almost wanted someone else to direct it. You asked Walter Hill and some other, hey, who wants to take this thing's a beast? What am
I did, but Walter Hill's a very close friend of mine. Mm-hmm. I think unconsciously I knew that it wasn't right, and I didn't want to direct it. It wasn't right, but I thought maybe somebody else could find something.
Figure that.
Then when I figured it out, and then you know, a huge debt to Art Linson, who said, "You're nuts. You got to, you know, figure this out. You do it." And then I got into looking at the ending again, and finally, I figured out what the ending what it had to be, and that made the whole thing come together for me, because I could then take that ending, Neil McCauley and Vincent Hanna, Neil McCauley being as fortunate to die with somebody who understood him better than anybody else on the planet with him, and at the same time that's one and the same as the guy who also killed him, that dialectic. And once I had that, then I could reverse engineer that into all the other scenes leading up to it throughout the whole screenplay. And then the whole thing clicked for me, and so I made it.
I want to ask you about one scene in there. De Niro walks into his house on the beach, puts his gun on a table, and goes to the window. It's early in the movie. And there's no words.
Right.
It's three shots, and it says everything you need to know about the character.
Right.
Any other filmmaker would take 3 pages of dialogue.
Yeah.
But I didn't find it in the script, and yet if anyone does a photograph to say Heat, it's that scene of him by the water in the blue of the night.
That scene was in my head, exactly that scene, for years. Exactly that color blue, and the room is bare, there's nothing there. He's yearning for something. And you feel that verb, you feel that.
It's also a great line of dialogue later. You have to be able to walk out.
Have no attachments. Allow nothing to be in your life that you cannot walk out on in 30 seconds flat if you spot the heat around the corner.
You can have no attachments. And that visually says that. Is there some real satisfaction you get when you get to finally visualize something? Does it feel like you saw it before?
You know,
what is it?
I'm sure you've had exactly the same experience where you visualize it,
and there it is.
By this point, for you to be gratified that you actually got there, it's so difficult, because the slightest thing wrong, and no, that's not exactly right.
We've been face to face, yeah. But I will not hesitate, not for a second.
Maybe that's the way it'll be.
What was that like, directing those two guys? Were the two icons like that? How did you approach?
With great respect, number one. You bet they're icons. They're beyond great. Self-conscious. And then we were all three of us very respectful of that scene, because it was the heart of the picture. We discussed it a couple times and kind of paraphrased our way through it, but I wouldn't rehearse it. We wanted it to be as spontaneous as it could be in the moment.
I saw your notations on the script for that scene. You were adjusting dialogue and all that. And I thought, wow, right up to the shooting day still. But it's because you hadn't rehearsed it before. This was the first time you all heard it all together. It was on the days you were shooting.
Well,
I
probably wrote that scene a lot, but but little touches here and there, because it's very delicate. I mean, the scene seems very natural. I mean, they trading off on each other, and it's building. One of the big lessons, we learned, in a way, the easiest people to work with are actors who are really great, who have very strong artistic egos, are very ambitious, and are really good at what they do. Because you all have a big ambition. So now we're together with this big ambition, which is really to make this thing work. And I knew I had to be at the top of my game to work with these guys, and I think I was. I wanted to do a film in which every single life, every character, is almost its own universe. And the way they are within that is as complete, three-dimensional as possible. And the way they think the world works is going to affect what happens to them. And to do it on a big canvas, but still subjectively immerse you into the characters, so you really feel for these people and understand who they are, whether it's Breeden the driver or Ashley Judd or Charlene Chiherlis and Val Kilmer. And then exploring who each guy is, particularly, the characters played by Bob and Al. You're truly antithetical to each other.
We have to talk about the shootout in Heat, because that has to be the best shootout of all time.
Put your hands in the air! Put your hands in the air!
There's a Brian Eno percussion track under it that was quite perfect.
It's interesting. I watched it many, many times, and it was when I was really dissecting it for this that I even noticed. In that shootout scene, Pacino was coming up to the bank. De Niro's already gotten into the car. Val Kilmer's stepping out, and right when he smiles, he sees the cops, and then as he takes his first shot, you cut the music. Suddenly, it's real, and you're right there.
Yeah.
For 6 minutes, there's no music. It's just the sound of the guns
Right.
and the ricochets, and you feel like you're under assault. You feel like you're hiding with these guys. How did you put that amazing sequence together?
In my planning, I wanted to move from the dramatic to actuality.
Right.
The second he sees them, no hesitation.
Right.
Bam, he always opens up. The planning and everything else came from what are situations in which everything suddenly starts to go wrong. The LAPD assets, as the clock ticks, more and more of them are going to come in. The point is to get out and get out fast and do it with real aggression. The police are used to overwhelming power and overwhelming force. They're not used to being assaulted by people who know what they do, and they don't do that well when they are. If drama is conflict, that's the basic conflict. But again, it's all character and it's all story. Sizemore's route that he takes is like Sizemore,
Yeah.
He picks up a child. Why does he pick up a child? That's because he's a sociopath. Right. He would do anything for his kids, but he doesn't care about your kids at all. They don't even, they're zeros. McCauley fires randomly because he knows Pacino will try to keep people down. It's all driven by character and attitude and everything else. But the choreography of the scene and where they were in the landscape I plotted out, months before we shot it. It was down to every single detail. And then all of the weapons training that the guys did were under very, very strict supervision by the range masters, LA County Sheriff's range masters. I was able to build every single car and station on that shootout, this lamppost, this mailbox with full live ammo. So in the actors' minds, not only did they become incredibly skilled, but it was real. They used some of the film of Val Kilmer firing forward, turning, firing back, and then doing a reload. They used that at Fort Bragg. 95% of you will not be able to fire as well as this actor.
Wow.
So this was the...
Years later, there was a real shootout in LA.
Right.
And it looked and felt just like what you had.
Well,
What does that feel like as a filmmaker when you make something that partly they probably saw the movie.
Yeah.
And that's probably what gave.
Well, they did see the movie. Yeah, I learned this from the LAPD. They had just about worn out a video cassette. The first thing is, your stomach drops. I mean, it's the first thing you think, because you don't want to feel that you're responsible for some mayhem and loss of life or injury that that could have come from something that you did in a film. It's just a bigger question than Heat. And it comes up all the time. It's going to come up even more.
Sure.
As ISIS and everybody else uses media, sometimes very effectively, to a heinous purpose. The pathology that's out there will find its source. It will search out and find its source to motivate it.
Right.
And if it's not source A, it's going to be inspiration B. The story structure itself was brilliant.
Here we go. Percent. Here we go. Percent. And action.
You wanted to do a story that took place in LA all at night, and you found it in Collateral.
I was taken with the idea of doing everything in one night. And I had just come from doing a number of large movies, and the idea of focusing in on one 12-hour period in one place and seeing into the night of L.A., you know, making that the landscape in which these revelations occur. The thing about Collateral was that it's the first photoreal digital film, and that's because you can't see the city at night,
right?
Unless
like
you're digital.
Black, yeah.
And there wasn't anything, yeah. But it really is, it's the characters who were most fascinating to me, I think. Particularly Vincent, particularly Tom Cruise's character, who's a salesman of improvisation and jazz, you know, living life spontaneously, reacting, you know, to a guy who has, you know, a middle class, inhibited, repressed thing and fantasies. Anyway, that collision of these two characters.
How am I represented? You are flowing with my work.
A lot of immersion of character with him.
Yeah. We're working out all the skill sets this guy would have. We're doing them here in this building.
Let's make a note that I like it when the punch is better. I like it better. The open hand. This way.
He was planning assassinations of various PAs, and they would somebody would drive to work, and all of a sudden they'd be hit on the back with a post-it. They'd turn around, and he'd be there or something because he'd been following him for the last 3 hours.
Now, this was a real testament to you. I had seen in early versions of the script, I think, that was out, but I never would have seen the movie that you saw. I've gone back since to look at the original draft that I had read, and now I can't see a version other than your version. And you did some rewriting, but every time I was watching it and I was going, I didn't read that.
I do this for a living!
So it just shows how you can give the same script to different directors.
Wow, that's interesting.
And end up with a different movie entirely. First, it was not as interesting to me, and then when you were going to do it, suddenly I could just picture a whole other thing, and you turned it into something else. I mean, that's the power of what you do. I mean, you also did a little bit of rewriting, but not really, not as much as I thought when I went back and
Well, the script kind of, I wasn't really responding. The story structure itself was brilliant. It's kind of like a diamond, and everything is inside the stone. It's all the refractions. They're refractions of each other. You know, they start out in one place and they end up crossing.
You all right? Enjoy LA.
Anthony Von Seck asks, you're famous for doing multiple takes to get actors out of their heads. What other approaches do you use to achieve this?
I try to be as subjective as I can to really immerse them. Because if you and I are sitting here like this, if Al kind of went like that, De Niro was going like this. At every single thing, there would be an organic unity in take 11. There'd be a different organic unity in take 12.
You shot that scene with two cameras at once, kind of like we're doing here, what's called cross coverage. It's one of the few times you've done that, or do you do that?
No, I've done it before, whenever it calls for it.
And people like myself and my family are left hung out to dry, used up.
Yeah, so it's basically, you know, the opposite camera was just off frame.
Just off
frame by this much. You know?
Your DP has to have a way of lighting it so that both sides work.
Yeah, Dante Spinati, yeah.
Dante's great. Here's a Twitter question from Miladin Kulik. Mr. Mann, what movie or movies inspired you to become a movie director?
I was particularly influenced by everything from Weimar through Battleship Potemkin through German silent cinema. What particularly made a huge impact was Strangelove.
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
It was like suddenly a door opening up. You can make cinematic art or artistic cinema for a big audience and have a big impact. And so Kubrick was a big early influence.
What's your personal just philosophy about filmmaking?
Well, it's to me two things. One is that, you know, I consider myself a really lucky man in that I found that thing that I feel passionate about, and you know, I think that's rare. I'm always at my best when I'm working on the edge of something. I don't think I have ever been without the ambition to try and bring audience into the story or into the characters.
John Dillinger, Rob Banks.
I'm a thief!
Into the 2-hour dream, which is the film's ambition to be.
I'm a young man,
The ambition to try to bring myself out onto some kind of a frontier where I'm reaching for it. Where you're feeling challenged to something I haven't done before, a subject I haven't gotten into. That's always a better place to be.
One of our most unique, admired, and imitated filmmakers, Michael Mann, thank you for being here on the director's chair.
Great.
And with El Rey. Thank you, senor.